Wheeler, and I'm here with Steve Johnson to talk about his new book, Operation Renfield, also known as Operation Vampire, and the link is down below in the description. Just before we begin, I'd also like to point out David Halquist's book, Hard Moon, has been released. If you like snazzy, hard sci fi detective noir action thriller, then that's certainly the book for you. Steve, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, thanks.
Outstanding. I'm really glad to hear that. So tell us a little bit about Operation Renfield.
Okay, Operation Renfield is the first half of the book that we just released under the title Operation Vampire. It's a World War II action adventure in a world where the Axis has vampires and demons and dragons, but the good guys are not entirely without sorcerous resources either. We got elves and dwarves and all that sort of thing.
Awesome. So what's the basic plot?
Well, in Renfield, it's called that because our heroes are checking out an Austrian officer training camp. In this book, the bad guys are the Austro-Hungarian Empire because in World War One, rather than accept defeat, they decided to go ahead and accept the benefits of the powers of hell because you don't
Ah,
want to lose, right?
as you do.
Uh, yeah, well, because Nazi vampires haven't done a lot, and I thought we'll have a Germanic enemy with all the dark vampire and werewolf stuff that German mythology has, but without the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Although there are a couple of old SS diehards in the book. Anyway, so they're checking out this place, and it's not an officer training camp, it's a place where they make new vampires. And, once you embrace a new guy into undeath, you're stuck with him forever. So they put them through a lot of tests and challenges to make sure they're the guys that they really want to live with for eternity.
Right.
Um, and, it's a totalitarian society. So a lot of the candidates really aren't into this, but it's the best option they have in a bad world. Well, so our heroes find out what it is, but they don't really know what's going on, so they have to take a prisoner whom they interrogate, find out generally what's going on, and decide that even though their job is to just go back and tell the US Army what this place is and how important it is, if they can actually kill off some of the faculty, some of the really elder vampires, that could set the enemy cause back a long time. Because
Right.
if they lose a 200-year-old vampire, well, it takes 200 years to make another one. And
That's
we're
true.
Americans. We figure this war is going to be over. Chop chop. They're not going to have time to make any more Draculas. So it's
Huh.
your typical commando raid develops into something bigger,
Yes.
and then so that was called Operation Renfield, and I self-published that about 3 years ago. Um, and then I did a sequel where the Allies form a group of everybody who's had experience with the occult and survived. And that scouting group is going to be leading the eventual, someday, invasion of hell. Because the enemy's power is actually coming from below. And until we go in there and kick Satan's ass off his throne, it's never going to stop. So,
All right.
so my D-Day, the D stands for devil.
I love it.
So the second half of the book, which I think is actually longer, is his special unit being used to figure out what's going on in Eastern Europe. Because, Joe Stalin, our brave ally, stops coming out in the daylight one day, and a couple of weeks later, the entire Soviet Union switches sides because somehow they've gotten a vampire to him and switched his allegiances.
Ha.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, I know we formed this special unit and your job is to reconnoiter hell, but we're going to shove you in front of this huge Soviet vampire invasion because we're shoving everybody, the cooks and the bakers and the telephone operators and you guys.
I like the ideas.
Well, thank you kindly.
So what inspired you
Now,
to make stuff like this?
I'm a huge fan of a book by Poul Anderson called Operation Chaos uh, from the 60s, in which it's an alternative World War II. This one is against a caliphate of Shiite, what do you call them?
Muslims?
Heretics. Well, they're Muslims, yeah, but even the Muslims don't like these guys because they have allied themselves with the powers of darkness. because some way that'll help Allah. I don't really understand it, but the hero's a werewolf, and he gets hooked up with a U.S. Army witch, and they are trying to find out why everything in this one sector of the battlefield keeps getting destroyed, and they find out it's an Afrit, one of those fire spirits that you hear about.
Hmm.
And then it just keeps going. And like a lot of my favorite series of the time, behind the Afrit is a demon. Behind the demon is a group of shapeshifters who later they find out is just one entity who has different identities. And behind that is hell. So every time you succeed, that just means you've gone one step up the staircase and now you have a bigger job to deal with. And I wound up using that theme as well.
I like it.
Oh, and then it just kept going, man.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, but what if this happened? Oh, well, let's see. Then that one. Well, what if we threw this in there? I I have some hints in this book about what's going on over in the Pacific, where
Hmm.
the sea folk who live on the bottom of the Pacific are fighting us and our plucky Japanese allies in this war.
Because they were our allies in World War One.
They were allies in World War One, absolutely right.
Hmm.
And they would be again if their attempt to expand their empire was being blocked by mermen coming up from the ocean floor.
Right.
And you can't see them down there, and you can't really bomb them because they're 2,000 feet down. So I haven't done that story yet, but I want to at some point.
Oh yeah, and that's a great idea in and of itself. You could have some really awesome submarine and cave and water naval battles and all that good stuff.
Well, in the naval battles, we're the only ones that bring ships. So
Hmm.
you might have the first boarding action in 100 years, where
Right.
they're climbing up out of the water, and, our ships are not really designed to repel boarders.
That's
They're
true.
cramped, they're dark, they're very vertical instead of being wide, and we don't really have enough Marines to do that.
Right.
That idea all came from someone on Facebook who said, hey, I used to be a Marine. What are they doing in this war? And I said, yeah, well, as a matter of fact. and then and I got their attention that way. Yeah, I've been working on this for 4 years on and off, and I think I finally got it all to cohere. Now, the ultimate goal is the invasion of hell, but that's going to be a whole different another thing, which I am still figuring out.
Wooly Ram says, "Do the Japanese in your world create anime?"
Did they do that before they got nuked?
Absolutely not. But
Well, okay then.
well, no, they had some animation. They did get Tale of Genji, I think.
Well, but isn't anime now an imitation of our TV and comic books?
Oh, they always were.
Sure. So
Uh,
the Japanese decided to copy America after World War II because, like Ruth Benedict says, in Japanese society, someone is either above you or below you. And after the war, they decided America beat us. That must mean they're the big brother and we are the younger brother and we should be like them. But all they can copy is what they see on TV. At least that's my take on it. So I don't think anime would exist if we had never actually fought and defeated the Japanese. Not in its current form, anyway.
that's true. That's true. Well, there's the answer. Uh,
It's an answer.
well, there's a whole bunch of things where it's like the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, and it's a whole bunch of
Mm-hmm.
dominoes, like
Oh yeah.
this to that and the other thing, and then the Treaty of Versailles and Japanese imperialism, Pearl Harbor, and then it goes anime. And it's showing that all the causes and injustices of the world come from
Yeah.
the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand.
Well, yeah. If it wasn't that, it might have been something else. But then it could have gone in a whole different direction.
Well, the only thing that changed about our conversation would be then, who got shot or who got blown up by an
Sure.
anarchist.
What the match was that started the Great War, or if we can somehow put off the Great War till the mid 20s, maybe the tensions get easier well as the Russians and Austrians adapt to the industrial age, if they successfully do. I have my doubts because they had every possibility of doing that and didn't, but maybe they would.
Mm. Well, Russia's too. Like Austro-Hungary was just kind of fossil anyway, But I always thought
Yeah.
Russia was too, even as they tried to industrialize, because they tried to industrialize under Peter and Catherine the Great.
Hmm.
No relation. Uh, but
The
uh,
Great Family
right,
is.
right, right. Yes. They tried to industrialize, but Russia's just too. I don't know. Like, people. There's like the rich, and then there's the slaves. There's
Yeah.
like so much land and expanse. It's just not like, if I could see like any nation actually going for the dark powers and whatnot, it would be Russia, if only to get at hellish spirits.
Well, um, I don't know who it was. It wasn't Churchill, but somebody said the Soviet project was an attempt to completely remake human nature. And if you know Russians, you can sympathize.
Absolutely. I have a Russian working for me right now,
Oh, yeah?
and it's like he alternates between surly and gung ho, and it's mostly surly, and sometimes I have to like yell at him to put him in his place, and then it's like it's okay for a long time, and then it's like another challenge, and I have to put him in his place, and it's like, okay, all right, I see why Russia is the way it is.
Sure. Oh, the boss isn't looking? Well, I don't have to do anything.
Right.
But, well, yeah, can you blame them? No, because of their historical experiences. Russia, I'm just reading, right now, I'm reading a book about the Eastern Front in the First World War.
Mhm.
Nicholas tried to industrialize them, top down, the same way the Soviets did. Uh, but he allowed people with decent ideas, sort of the minor nobility, to try their own stuff, and it was starting to work by World War One. So it would have been possible, although unlikely, for the Russians to make that industrial transition and then not be so scared and not so scary anymore. My story assumes that didn't happen because it's a combat horror story, and you want things to be grim.
Right.
Not that, not that they're a whole lot grimmer than the actual war if you're in it.
That's true.
So all the gritty details I actually dedicated it to two different people. Paul Anderson, who wrote the book about, magical World War II combat, and Bill Malden, who wrote Up Front.
Mm.
He was a cartoonist with Stars and Stripes, and also a combat soldier. So he would, in the morning he'd draw a cartoon, and then if they were putting in an attack or something, he'd go up to the front lines. And he had a whole lot of, here's how things work in the infantry, which I ruthlessly plundered.
Yeah. Well, you knowing your sources actually only increases the quality of the book, for what you've set up anyway.
You want the parts that aren't totally off the wall to be completely believable.
Mhm.
Like when you put on a field jacket, it's like wrapping a stiff layer of canvas around yourself. They're not soft and warm or soft and they're not soft and comfortable like modern clothes.
No.
It's almost like armor. Now they don't get a lot worse when they get wet, as I discovered.
That's good.
You know, it's
Yeah.
sense impressions like that make you feel like you're there and allows you to somehow not get overloaded by, well, there's literally no telling what's going to be on the next page. It could be demons, it could be dragons, it could be a demon dragon, a
Mhm.
dragon who made a bargain with Satan and became a demon. Hold on a sec, I'm writing that down because we always got a sequel.
Exactly.
But if it's grounded, then the weird stuff is a surprise, which you think, well, in this anything goes world, it shouldn't be a surprise, but it always would be. I mean, we live here in the bizarre technological future where if somebody said, yeah, we got this new phone, you can use it to call the moon, you wouldn't just have your mouth hanging open like you'd met a man who was on fire. You would say, oh, cool. I don't really need that.
So
Do
are
I know
you
anyone? Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. So are you saying that Russia has plenty of black juju going on?
Well, if it's just suffering, then oh yeah, they do. Their strategic suffering reserve would be the greatest of any power on Earth. The poor. Yeah, and, being a top down society in the 30s, Stalin and his boys just decide, you're going to be a vampire, you're going to be a vampire, you're going to be a vampire, you're not. And get their act together. And when they're ready, the whole Soviet Union comes at us at once. The
Right.
second volume is called Operation Vulture because they pick the bones of their society to get that maximum first strike. There ain't going to be a whole lot of Russia left, even if they win.
Right.
But what does Stalin care? He's going to live forever now.
Exactly. And considering how he's purported to have died screaming and like trying to strangle something, he did not. He did not have a very pleasant death. Some people say he was poisoned. I say that since he was a priest before he turned communist, he knew
Hmm.
what was coming.
You know what? If anybody could be sure of his spiritual destination, I think he'd be pretty sure. Yeah, and of course, this is in 53. Uh, in January of 53, Stalin decided, okay, the current enemy is doctors. Doctors think they're better than everyone else. They are anti socialist, and many of them are criminals. So he arrested a bunch of doctors, and the rest were terrified. It was weird, actually. Somebody noticed, I haven't been arrested yet, and my last name is near the bottom of the alphabet.
Eh,
Is that the only reason I haven't been arrested? So the doctors are demoralized. They're in concentration camps. And then Stalin gets sick, and what do you know? Nobody can save him. So, that's not too much of a mystery to me.
right. Uh, it's hmm. It's interesting because like crystallized human suffering and death and
Ugh.
misery and all that jazz. But then it's also just a fascinating look. Though, so are you going? So you've mentioned vampires and dragons and other things before. So is this like a
Mhm.
grand alliance of races trying to stop the Russian advance?
Precisely. It's whatever we have in the area today. And anything with a pulse really should be on our side and not on the side of the Austro Hungarians who are led by vampires.
Mm-hmm.
So the old folk, it turns out there's more of them in Europe than we thought. But also, there's the gnomes and the brownies and the elves and the dwarves who decided Europe wasn't working out for them and caught a ride to America.
I could believe that.
Yeah, elvish Americans.
Yeah, exactly. In the forests and the mountains and stuff like that, they'd have to fight the spirits of the Native Americans for a toehold. But yeah, I could see it working out for them. Slaying thunderbirds and whatnot.
Yeah, well, there's that too. But yeah, mountains, plains, empty rivers and forests, we got. And Europe was getting full a couple hundred years ago. So it's some of what really happened. The new world coming back to save the old world from which they sprang. Plus, there's pockets of weirdos we keep running into, and once you explain the situation, if they're even moderately rational, they want to help.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's taking coalition warfare. The old World War II thing where each squad has a Kelly and a Ramirez and an O'Connor and a Greenberg. Well, we're going a little further.
Yeah. Like that. Oh, it's like that Overlord movie, and you
Hmm,
could tell like what. Did you see that?
I didn't. I heard a 1 hour review of it. If I actually could have watched the movie in that hour, but no, I haven't yet.
It's actually, I'd say it's worth your time and probably relevant to your interests. And then they had
Okay.
the squad, and it was like, they had each one was the archetype, and it's like, well, which one's named Greenberg? That one. That one
Oh, all right.
specifically. It's like, what? How could you tell? They went for it. Uh,
Okay.
but like I'm just saying that like the character was too obvious. It wasn't like they tried for like everyone in the multi-diverse team in the same squad with like the
Hmm.
black sergeant, and then there was like a Hispanic fella, a couple of white guys, Jewish fella, and I can't remember the rest. And it's actually a really good movie, but it's like they hit that so ham-handedly that like I'm just sitting there and it's like and it's like he says, oh, what are they going to do to me? And it's like, please guys, please subtlety. Uh well,
Well,
but
subtlety was not something good.
mm, oh, go for it.
Subtlety was not something that the period really cared about because we got to beat the crowds.
Yep.
Part of what I'm doing is I'm not writing it exactly as it would have been written in the 1940s,
Mhm.
but I'm trying to get a lot of the language,
Yeah.
a lot of the sentence structure and stuff. Partly because I've been marinating in this for so long that it comes out almost automatically. But I want to give you the feeling of a different time. And I think if I succeeded, then if you met a guy who talked like a modern 21st century American, you'd think, okay, what alternate dimension is he from? Because he sounds strange.
Right. Soldiers, I want to yeet yourselves over that hill and then floss on their corpses. It's like, no, no, Sarge, no. No Fortnite
That's right.
references, please. Uh, that's
Charlie,
pretty
don't
dated.
floss. Is it already?
It's getting there.
Okay.
Fortnite's still pretty popular, but it's down in subscribers. Uh,
I, te- I teach high school in my civilian job, and they're still talking about it, so can't be that
mm-hmm.
old.
Wooly Ram says I forgot about sergeants. Infantry need sergeants like planets need gravity. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And our hero, in fact, is a sergeant. And for a while, they were going to pin a bar on him and make him an officer. And then Congress decided, nah.
Yeah.
Now, our hero, who is an Elvish American from Manhattan, never specifically says they decided not to commission anybody who wasn't 100% human. But that's
Right.
what happened. And I think I snuck that in without having it. It's first person, so anything our hero doesn't know, I got to tell you in a sort of a roundabout way.
Right. No, I get you. And you don't want this to be some sort of weird preachy thing anyway. Because if you don't if you just kind of go for it, it just kind of might not be pleasant for the reader to look at.
Well, there's an adequate number of stories out there who take that stuff into the foreground already.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'd be very good at that.
Right. And it's never good. Getting that sort of message fiction in. Very unpopular, I guess.
Well,
Uh,
if it's the actual theme of the entire story, well, like many Star Trek episodes were about, we really should be nicer to each other, and as long as it derives organically from what's going on, I guess I wouldn't mind. But this is more of a, we're here, he's over there, he's got this power that allows him to grow wings on other people, whether they want it or not. How do we
oh,
fix this? Yeah, I know, right?
that's fantastic. But I don't know if I would want that fixed. It's like all of a sudden I have wings. Unless of
I
course.
mean, the short and obvious problem is you drop everything you're holding because now your fingers are the veins of your bat wings.
Ah, that's what you meant.
Yeah, and your clothes rip off, so anything that's strapped on falls to the ground. You can't pick stuff up because you don't really have hands anymore.
Yes.
Now, eventually, you could fly, but you're not going to figure that out in the 10 minutes it takes the bat casting guy in the woods to wipe you out.
You're right. I actually worked it out with my sister about what it would require to have like Valkyrie wings, and it's
Oh,
it's basically you need a dedicated bit of brain matter. You need basically a second heart, or at least a rudimentary like pumping system and complement to your proper heart.
okay,
And basically, your bone structure would have to be set up. So, like, we've got the shoulder blades, right?
right.
Like,
Oh,
we never
that's going to be a problem, yeah.
right, and it's like we never quite figured out the design, but like you would need like a second set of shoulder blades along your back, and like you'd have to be like real careful because like your entire system would have to rearrange itself around the fact that you have wings.
Oh, yeah. You're going to need to either weigh 40 pounds or have absurdly strong muscles. Because
Yeah,
the
pretty
square
much.
cube law, square cube law says it takes 4 times as much effort to lift a guy who's twice as high, and you're a lot bigger than a bird.
Oh yeah. No, like hauling my 330 something pound butt with wings like would be I need huge wings, and
Yes,
I
yes, you would.
need the right type of aerodynamics, which I just don't have.
Now, there are types of muscle that can generate 8 to 10 times as much force as we can for the same number of pounds. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's how chimpanzees can swing around in trees holding their entire weight on one arm all day.
Yep.
Their muscles are different. Plus, of course, if we're talking about this universe, well, then you can be empowered by supernatural energy.
That's true.
If you're on the other side, though, that supernatural energy comes at a price.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of. There's no first person characters apart from our hero, Mithrandil Murphy. So we don't really know how the enemy stuff works.
I love the
Okay,
name.
Mick Murphy, but that's what people call him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. I like it.
Yeah, you
Hmm.
know, half Irish, half Italian, or half Irish, half Elvish, and me in the middle.
Right, right. I get you. I love it.
And his corporal, his number two, his best buddy is Dave Zwergbaum, who is a Brooklyn dwarf.
So he's extra combative.
Yes, yes, gets that from both sides, as it were. Which is nice because if you want to talk about anything that's not related to the mission, he's the one who challenges everyone's assumptions and makes them defend them, which means now we can hear them.
Hmm.
I mean, if you want to have some maiden butter dialogue, at least you can make it feisty.
Yeah. No, I get you. Let's see here. Wooly Ram asks, what variants of elves do you got in your world?
Well, the variants of elves are kind of like the variants of Germans or Celts. There's the ones from over here, and there's the ones from over there. But if you give them 1,000 years instead of 100, they're physically kind of different. Now, did they all come from the same rootstock and develop separately? Our hero doesn't know. That's above his pay grade. But you have your classic wood elves, but then you have your elves from the high wooded mountains like the Harz Mountains or the Alps, who human beings never see.
Hmm.
And they're absurdly, painfully thin and pale because they don't have to eat very much, and can apparently move from any snow covered place to any other snow covered place without leaving tracks in between. They're not really on either side, which is probably as well because once you try to retake Europe from the powers of darkness who are centered in Austria, okay, you get France, you get Germany. Now you have to get over the Alps,
Yes.
which even Hannibal had some problems with. Yeah, the first half of the story is set during the Alpine campaign, where they're using reconnaissance troops to try to locate the enemy before they get us.
Hmm.
Uh, then the second half, Operation Vulture, that's set on the flat plains of Poland, which is totally different.
Yes.
You can see the enemy 10 miles away, but it's the entire Russian nation coming at you. Thank God they can't move 24/7 because their vampire officers have to get under cover before the sun comes up.
Right. So it's
So,
like, an hour to prepare or whatever, and then it's like 8 hours of charging, and then it's like, couple hours couple hours to make camp and dig a hole sufficient for your officer to survive the sun in.
yes, now, would some of those troops deliberately fail that mission? Yeah, they would a couple times until they find out what's going on and make some examples. It's like I tell my students in ancient history. The the techniques of training humans to obey like dogs are old and they're known and they work, which is sad. So
Hmm.
yeah, so yeah, the Soviet vampire army is gonna get its act together and work smoothly after a fashion, but only at night.
Yes.
And the rest of us, of course, you would think, okay, cool. So we stay alive at night and then do all the work in the day. Okay, the breathing side has to sleep sometime.
Hmm.
So in practice, we own the night, they own the day, like Vietnam, except in the open with tanks and artillery. But in practice, we can't really get anything rolling because as soon as the sun goes down, they all come out.
Right. Hmm. Yeah, you're right. And so it's like even if you like split everyone up, you'd still have that problem where like you're having your force and people don't exactly like to switch their sleep schedules by 12 hours. Russians or otherwise.
Now, well, since when have we asked you what you like?
Well, sure, 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 sure. But I'm just thinking about combat effectiveness.
Oh yeah, that's true. If you make them work for 5 straight days, they'll do it until they fall on their face and can't move.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the actual Soviet Union, that was their combat plan. Get all the sleep you want, get all the food you want, and then you go into action for 4 straight days and nights. After which you're used up and we bring you back to a rest camp. Now, the Soviet war plan says we're going to bring back what's left after 4 days because we're going to basically use up this regiment and then we'll make a new one out of the survivors.
Ooh.
So even without the undead, they'd figured out how far they could push their human property.
Mm-hmm.
And the rule was now don't do it any further. Oh, not because it's, wrong or anything. It just doesn't work.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely use some of that. It is unfortunate that a lot of the what would happen if there were soulless vampires pushing human beings around like cattle, a lot of that's been answered by us already.
Right. Specifically, the same people.
Well, yes. Now, it's a little, I feel a little bad about making the Austrians the bad guys because they really weren't. But,
Sure.
yeah, but after working for the powers of hell for a while, any part of you that could be bad is.
Yes.
And in Operation Renfield, the first part, they do actually, meet a couple, well, he's not an Austrian, he's a Slovak, who are about to be turned into vampires and really are not sanguine about this, no pun intended. But there's no way we can like bail them out. What if, we're going to take this guy with us? What if he changes his mind halfway there and bites somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Plus, and I should mention this because one of the coolest parts, there was in a novel I wrote a long time ago, there was a idea that the elves are really jealous of mortal man because we live, we die, and then we go to heaven or we go to hell. Elves live until they're killed, but then whoop, that's it. They're like a birthday candle. They're gone. So they hate us.
Wow.
So yeah, so I took that into this world, but my hero's half elven. His old
Right.
man, whom he doesn't like very much, abandoned them, when they were younger, and was a full-blooded elf. So he's never going to die, but when he does, he's done. Mick can die, but then he gets better. That is, he falls about halfway into the afterlife and shakes himself off and climbs back out.
Okay.
Which is handy in a scene early on where one of his guys gets his leg blown off by a mine. The dude is still alive when Mick gets there, and as he starts to die, Mick grabs hold of him and tries to haul him back out of the pit.
Right.
You can't do that with everybody because you can't be everywhere.
Right.
But it's a neat thing, and eventually leads into it's also an engine to discover what's going on because, I mean, yes, he's an American soldier and he's on the right side, but Mick's not a perfect guy. So his side of death, he can at least see hell from, which is reconnaissance in this war.
Oh, I get where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, he gets shot in the head, and it's like, oh heck, I'm dead now. And then, who are all those guys down there below the level of the pit?
Right.
Now, could you go to the next step and say, hey Sarge, how about you kill yourself and see what they're doing? I
No,
didn't go
that's
there yet, but there is a sequel coming.
yeah. And besides that, it's like, there's a difference when it's suicide and stuff like that. He'd have to be real careful, wouldn't he? Otherwise, if he
Well,
wants to die too much.
indeed. And, Mick Murphy's a Catholic. Suicide is a sin. He's afraid, yeah, but if I did it, I might not be able to come back. I don't know what the rules are. There's
Right.
no manual.
That's true. There's nothing in the Bible about immortals coming back and seeing hell and stuff like that. Nothing at all. But
I have a cute line in the book, actually, where our hero says, I certainly hope that the man came to save elves, too. But
hmm
you're not going to find that in the Bible. In fact, all the pointy-eared immortals you find in the Bible are on the wrong side.
yeah, but it is also I've always found that interesting because it's like if you have like functionally immortal characters, like
Mhm.
what are their views on on religion because they don't believe that they'll die of natural causes. They'll die if somebody stabs them. So you can spend 100 years being a swordsman, making yourself immune to poisons and stuff like that, getting the quick draw down so that, conceivably, you can't be taken unawares and killed.
In which case, emotionally, why do you need the hope of heaven
Exactly.
or the fear of hell, for that matter?
Yep.
Well, I'm asserting that and of course, because our hero, his elvish father wasn't around that much and he didn't talk to him, he doesn't really know a lot of the old stories or how elven kind actually works.
Hmm.
But I'm working with the idea that you can't really doubt the existence of the afterlife in this world because some people can see it, but they don't respect it.
Right.
It's like, yes, I'm aware there's a maker and he has a law, but I don't see why it should apply to me.
Right. And there's always a question of like, what about those lowly animals, the humans and stuff like that? What's so special about them? Or,
Well, uh, Mick's dad, whom I hope to eventually meet in the sequel, because if the sequel's set in hell, he's going to be there at least some of the time. Uh, his attitude, as he expresses it, is I understand animals, I understand plants, but I don't understand why they made animals with a voice.
hmm.
What is the point of that? And so when he's told, well, they are made in God's image, like I flatly disbelieve that statement. Who said that? A human being said that.
Yeah, and that's a decent argument. It's like, what you get like various like species from across the stars and whatnot, and it's like, of course we're made in God's image, but what about you? Well, we're made in God's image. I don't think, God would have that
Yeah.
ugly pink skin. Obviously, anyone with a little bit of training knows that it's not so much the body as it is uh, the fact that we have souls and we have free will and stuff like that. But, it's always a fun way to go about it for like, people who haven't studied and whatnot.
Which is most of us, honestly. If you draft everybody and get a cross section society, you're not going to find a lot of people with whom that kind of argument cuts a lot of ice. It
It's
should,
true.
but it won't.
Yep. It was a particularly strong argument a long time ago, but honestly, it's like it's one of those things that people talk about, well, they made this argument. It's like, no, their propagandists made that argument. No one really believed in that sort of thing.
That'd be more likely to come out of the mouth of a modern than somebody in the 40s, because although they were drenched in propaganda, well, I'm going to say they didn't notice it as much. That can't have been true in Europe.
Mm,
The Nazi and the Soviet propaganda was everywhere, and people were skeptical of it. But over here, or even in the UK, I think,
hmm.
you would probably be more accepting of stuff that came from official sources.
Well, sure. And, we've got a different relationship with our government than Germans or Russians or
Oh, indeed.
Hungarians, etc. do. And it's like now we're seeing the cracks of it in our current generation. But, previously, it, you know, our government was either too far away or too weak or too distant for us to really care. And the closest thing we had to it was some dude who'd show up once or twice a year or whatever, and he'd be campaigning and he'd be kissing babies and then he'd disappear, and nothing would ever really change.
Oh, yes. Recently, as the 40s, the only federal government employee you ever saw was the postman.
Hmm. And even then, like I'm sure that includes like the sheriff and policeman sometimes as well.
But cops aren't federal.
Federal, you're right. You did say
Yeah.
federal. I thought,
Yeah, you had a government, but it wasn't the
yeah,
government. It was just the government of your local region.
yeah. You'd know the mayor or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd send somebody to Congress or the House if you had enough people. Probably not though.
So I'm trying to make this a plausible extrapolation of the real world. And whenever I haven't thought of something bizarre and cool about this world, it's like, well, we use what actually happened.
Hmm.
You know,
Absolutely. I mean, like even if you're making a totally new world, human nature doesn't change all that much. Most of what you have will be the same.
And if it did change so that your characters are emotionally very different from us, I'm not sure we'd find reading about them all that satisfying.
Yep. Like it's like, well, what if we had, barbarian hordes? What, you mean like the Mongols and the Goths and
Yeah,
the
we've done
Vandals?
that.
Yeah. Well,
Pretty sure we know what happens if you do that.
right. Well, what about elves? You mean like royalty?
For
And
example, sure.
yeah, like it's not as good as that, but it's like, it doesn't matter
Uh,
what what sort of what sort of thing you throw up in. It's like, well, what if we have a band of people never discovered by the civilized world? You mean like the Native Americans?
sure.
Like et cetera, et cetera. Like, well, what about a religion of evil? Well, we have Aztecs and and all that other people, and you know,
Carthage.
Carthage. You can make an argument for Islam during the jihad. Like you have 1,000 different little things you can do.
Sure.
Like the it just is, you just kind of, as weird as it is for a fantasy, as for like for fantasy stuff, you just pick and choose and mix and match until you got the connection that you want. Orcs must necessarily have a religion based on raiding or demons or whatever else if they're going to be like the sort of like nomadic barbarians they're usually portrayed as.
Yeah, but there's lots of battle religions in real life. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the Norse, the Gauls.
Oh yeah.
And if you know a little bit about those guys, you can find all sorts of stuff you didn't think of. Like, well, so these guys are a raiding group of nomadic tribesmen. And then you find something really cool the Mongols had that you can
Mm-hmm.
throw in there.
Oh yeah. And it's
So
mhm.
good. I'm doing that in the 20th century context by finding all these cool little crunchy bits about the Austrians and the US Army and the Brits and the Soviets and throwing it in there along with all loud fantasy stuff.
Mhm. And you're mixing it in together pretty well. I like
You
it.
know, I do try. I finally got hold of a shoe pack, which was a rubber coated shoe with a rubber boot over it.
Mhm.
Because if you put your just regular shoe in a rubber boot, it came off.
Right.
This is before they had combat boots. We actually went into World War II with our soldiers wearing shoes and then wrapping their ankles in canvas in a rigid canvas sleeve called puttee. We didn't have the combat boot till 1940,
I
and
mean,
even then, most guys didn't have one.
I've seen pictures of it, but that's the first time anyone called it anything.
Well, originally it was a jump boot,
Hmm.
and we're the only country that had it because leather gets scarce when you're at war.
Yep.
The Germans were still wearing boots with canvas uppers right till the end. So this rubber thing was like an intermediate thing called a shoe pack, and I'd read about it, but I actually found one on eBay.
Huh.
And wow. But there's all these little clues, sense impressions, like I said, smells and textures that you can throw in there. And honestly, they don't have to be true, but I always try to make them true. Like for example, both my grandfathers were in World War II on opposite sides, and my American grandfather had his World War I gas mask in the attic, and I thought, hey, it'd be cool, I'll put it on. Well, they got to be absolutely 100% airtight or they don't work.
Right.
But I didn't put that together with, okay, so pulling it onto your face requires tremendous efforts. Like take a plunger and stick it on your chin and then pull it over your entire head.
Mhm.
It's stiff and it hurts. I mean, to get that airtight seal. So I threw that in too.
But it'll add so much to it.
Yeah, well, I want it to be an immersive experience, as the kids say.
Yes. And like there's a what's the term, verisimilitude, like when you
Yeah.
do a period piece, even
Uh
if
huh.
you add fantasy elements, you do need enough verisimilitude to sort of pull people through. Like it's practically a parable that, if you write period piece, you better know the difference between a corset and a lady's vest or something like that, because the period piece readers will never forgive you.
Well, that's true. I've already heard from some people who just pointed out that the uniform which we have on the cover is historically inaccurate.
Right.
In that the headgear is more of the Class A officer's uniform, whereas on the sleeve he's clearly a sergeant.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't have made that mistake if I'd have known. On the other hand, I'm asking you to swallow immortals and vampires and an Austro-Hungarian World War II. So maybe the uniform evolved differently in that timeline. That would be my dot. And it is. I would have got that right if I could have.
Yeah. No, and it's a pretty good cover. Like covers, you do always need a good cover. Like I say at every show, and people judge the book by the cover, so you need a good cover. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's exactly what it needs to be, even if the hat's wrong apparently. It's still somebody who's like, "Oh, look at that. It's a oh no, it's not a person. It's like an elf. Ooh, what's this? Ooh."
Nobody ever sees the ears first. They see the red, they see the uniform, they see the planes in the background. It's like, holy cow, that's not a human being.
Mhm. Eh, I
Yeah, I'm really happy with it.
yeah. I noticed the ears pretty soon in just because
Okay.
it's like it's weird because you'd be surprised how many people just like mess up ears. So I kind of look at them and how they do it
Okay.
just to see.
Well, they are.
Yeah,
They are hard to draw. That's true.
yeah. One of the big Epstein things was when they brought out his corpse,
Hmm.
uh, the earlobes aren't the same as pictures of Epstein from before.
Really,
Yeah.
the
So,
French
mm,
used to use a photograph of the ear as an identifier.
really?
Yeah. Faces, sure, but they said they believed the shape of the ear was unique, and they developed a notation system where if you found a criminal, it's like, all right, turn to the left. Let me see your left. Oh, you're in our files. Because apparently, not a lot through your life can really change that. Well, if the earlobes were different, maybe that's not his body. Maybe it's somebody else.
Exactly. It's the memes are pretty like you can't really meme that because it's a complex idea. Even though it does come out every now and then. But
Yeah.
just the Epstein didn't kill himself is sufficient. Somebody asks, "Have you read the?" Wooly Ram says, "Have you read the Grim Noir series?"
Oh, hell yeah, I've read the Grimnar. And unfortunately for me, he is now doing a trench fantasy story, which apparently is a world war with magic. So I'm glad I got there first, but as soon as that comes out, everyone will think, oh, I see. This is what Steve Johnson was trying to do with Operation Vampire.
Right.
Uh, but I'm gonna read it, and I'm sure I'm gonna love it. Yes, I love the Grim Noir series. Oh my gosh, Hard Magic is so tightly constructed. There's two viewpoint characters, two
Mm-hmm.
parallel arcs. Everything pays off at the end,
Mm-hmm. I actually
and he makes it look easy.
right. I actually got messed up over like everything paying off in the end because it's like, and now there's this greater villain, and like the chairman's
Oh
dead, and everything's on fire, and I'm like, wait, why do I care about this?
yes, well, if you're gonna do a series,
Right.
um, you got to do something like that. I think the greatest
Mm-hmm.
master of that was Doc Smith,
Mm-hmm.
also in the 40s. His Lensman series was real popular in the end, but then he finally killed his villain.
Yes.
What do? Well, it turns out he was working for over villain. All right, you do that story. And he, in turn, was working for the arch villain, who was working for the master villain. There are 5 levels, I believe, in those 6 books.
You see, I always felt that you need not like you need to really have the arc, the tier one villain meet the hero or
Hmm.
anything like that. But I've always felt you need to like do something to introduce it far earlier in the series so that people, like kind of care, kind of get that
Well,
feel.
Doc Smith did that after the first book. The
Mm,
first time his lensman hit a wall and needed to make something up, they just dropped it in at the end. Then, throughout the second book, there's hints that the guys that they're working over have allies and people they take advice from, and then they become the villains in the third book. So yeah, the first
Mhm.
time it was blunt, but the second time it was pretty well done.
Oh, good.
And if I'm gonna do that, I need to follow that example.
Absolutely. I know for myself, I did it such that the villains are being spied upon by somebody who's heroic enough, and not the arc villain, but like the villain who's going to be the final boss of the series,
Uh huh.
shows up and
Oh,
gives them some scientific experiment to perform, and then disappears again, and then I have updates to what he's doing at, like, like where he's like, what are the characters doing during the story, so
uh
that
huh.
you're always kind of aware that he's on an immense colony ship slash solar sailor barreling
Okay.
towards the solar system to wreak havoc.
Is the reader aware from the jump that this guy is the top villain?
I imply that he's top enough.
Okay.
Uh, in another book, I imply that the hero grew, like, absorbed immense amounts of matter because he's a nanotech swarm, and then just snuffed out the evil star like a light, like a
Ah,
match.
the
And
hero
then
did that.
yeah, and then like he
Okay.
had to fight a war because they jumped onto his massive body, and he has to fight, like their viruses or something, like, and I don't even, like, I don't show that, I won't be showing that in the series for a very long time, but another book in the same universe talks about it, just so that it's there, it's information.
I like it.
In the end, From Noir was about yeeting entropy into a black hole. Absolutely.
Oh my.
I think he meant Grim Noir. Uh,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah. Which is, reasonable. Uh, I'm of the opinion that entropy will never get us. Uh, though some people, Malthusians, disagree.
Well, how big is your word never?
Infinite.
Ooh. Well, if we can organize things faster than entropy can disorganize them, we win.
Yes,
The rate of disorganization caused by heat is known. The rate at which intelligence can organize matter is not known and may actually not have a top.
that's right.
So yeah, it looks to me like you're probably right. Although at the end of time, let's compare notes. Maybe we'll be wrong.
Uh, but it's like, if there's an end of time, that means entropy won.
Oh yeah, it's like one of those bets. Well, if you win, you're dead. How are you going to collect?
Right. It's like, sure, I'll put $5 on it. It's like, either I never have to pay or I win. Like, it's a great little thing.
Yeah.
But also, it's a matter of, like, you got into Superversive Press. You must believe in the human spirit, for yourself, for good, and for all true noble things. And I view a part of that is that, assuming the Lord doesn't come back beforehand, is that
Mhm.
we will overcome entropy. Like, that's the ultimate goal, whether or not there's more universes or an infinite universe or whatever you
Huh.
have, because like, people can say about the Big Bang all you want, but it's we don't know enough yet. We
No,
just
we
have
don't.
these theories. It's just like evolution theory again. And
Well,
natural
the
selection is
big
a law, but like, you can have, like, big picture ideas that there is a source for stuff, but one, we'll never be able to see it, and two, if we could see it, that would mean that the Big Bang was ejecting light before it became the Big Bang.
right. So that leads to a contradiction. So what you're doing is you're counseling us all against thermodynamic despair.
Mm-hmm.
A phrase which is going in my next book, by the way. I don't care what my next book is about; it's going in there.
Absolutely.
If
It's
it's a cookbook, well, that might be a problem.
So we're facing down the dark heart of the universe and an ever winding down clock. But don't you worry, we can keep thermodynamic despair away with this pork steak recipe. Ooh.
We will have to cook it a little bit longer.
But fortunately, because of the heat dispersal, everything's perfect at room temperature. Oh well. We have no clue what happens after the ghosts are swept into hell or the goats are swept into hell. Yeah, that's true. Well, here's the thing though. If the Lord comes back, we have 1,000 years and something, and some indiscernible amount of time where things happen. You're faced with what you do, and like the redemption is completed, and you're now like in heaven forever,
Right.
or the new heaven and new earth, etc., etc. That comes after the 1,000 year and Satan being tossed in. By like, not that I'm saying. Whew, now this will be hard to say. I would think that the new heaven and new earth would be an entropy-less place in the sense of decay, but not in the sense of like heat and stuff like that. Like if you built a rocket ship with
Yeah.
your, fancy new body in the new heaven and new earth and just smashed it into a planet, like you'd probably be fine. The rocket ship, not so much.
It's only heaven for those of us who have souls. If you're a piece of metal, I'm sorry, you're out of luck.
Exactly. But
Fortunately, you don't mind.
right.
There's no reason that there's no reason perfection couldn't have structure.
Yep.
And
And
there's no reason perfection couldn't have a structure which can develop and evolve.
mhm.
And people say, well, what's it evolving towards? Well, I would argue many things can be perfect, and you have a choice of things. And it's entirely possible that as time goes by, the operation of intelligence will produce things that are equally perfect but more complicated.
Mhm.
I don't see how that process can have an end.
Right. And honestly, a lot of people, it's like uh it's believed, at least in Protestant circles, probably other ones as well, that everyone will have a job to do and things to take care of and purpose.
Well,
And
that's because in German Protestantism, work is virtue and idleness is sin.
yes, I mean, but that's normal though.
Yeah, okay. A lot of people believe it.
No, no. What I'm saying is that it's true to life. Like I engage in
Oh,
several
indeed,
jobs.
indeed. In a world of scarcity, idleness is sin because someone's going to starve if you don't work.
Mm,
But we would argue that the new heaven and new earth will not be a world of scarcity. Although, actually, that may be a hasty assumption.
yeah, because it's like there's scarcity that's a result of sin, and then
Oh,
there's
yeah,
like scarcity that requires people to work to overcome. Like it's not so much about people ever really starving to death because there's fruit trees everywhere, but it's about like kind of fulfilling an eternal and grand purpose. Um,
indeed.
which
Above mere survival.
exactly, which I bet those elves would love to have, wouldn't they?
They would because, you said earlier you can devote your immortal life to becoming absolutely frickin' unkillable.
Hmm.
Life is very detailed. There's gonna be stuff you didn't think of. And you're probably gonna see, oh, that one just got killed, and a few centuries later, oh, and Eritiliel just got killed by something we didn't even know could happen. So
Right.
they could still be living in fear, even if they were immortal and trying to find a way to cheat.
Hmm.
And our hero is not tempted by that in this book, but he is tempted by taking the material world so seriously as to think that that's all there is. And you would think if you have actually seen the afterlife repeatedly, you'd be immune to that. But none of us has a perfect spiritual memory, if you will.
Right. I get you. And it's always a whole bunch of questions we can ask and in a way sort of answer when writing these books. Uh, what else do we write these books for but to speculate about awesome and fantastical ideas?
Yeah,
And one of the benefits of that is that it's sort of a way for us to examine a new thought form in ways like the science fiction always has. I downloaded a new thought form. I've seen that before, which is like good for some of it if you've got the thing. Otherwise, you ask too many questions. But What am I thinking? All right, but it's like now we can look at it. What would the elf
Hmm.
sergeant think of the souls, and what would his slightly evil or father think of this and that, and the morality of things, and the fact that everyone else will have some sort of belief, in that you can see it, and you're Roman Catholic, thank goodness, at
Hmm.
least. But there's all this other stuff coming down on it that just requires you to ask questions. And if there isn't a good answer for them, it's going to be very unsatisfying
Oh,
to
indeed.
the reader. Just because it's like have, um, you could have these things answered, but you simply don't want to examine what might be the most interesting part of it.
Well, in my particular case, my character is not particularly reflective. I mean, part of it is his hard scrabble upbringing, and part of it is he's got a world war to deal with. He ain't got time to think about the richness of the why. But I assume the reader is
Hmm.
interested in the big picture. So, in a way, that's good because I have to sort of drag Mick into it, and then he can
Hmm.
describe here's what I saw, here's what I heard, here's what it felt like, and allow the reader to draw his conclusions about what that means.
Right. Exactly. And it's if you do it right, there won't be questions. There'll be the reader who understands the logical progression. But if you don't, that's gets scary.
We've all read a lot of stories that attempted to answer the big questions and did so in an insufficiently uh, subtle manner.
Right. Hi,
It
my
also
name's
doesn't
Steve.
help. It also doesn't help that every time you say these things out loud, they sound kind of stupid. At least my answers to the universal thing sound stupid. But if you edge into them with experience, they take on a subtlety and a complexity that I think the actual answers to the big spiritual questions really do have.
Yeah. It.
If
Hmm,
if I could say it in 20 words, I wouldn't have to write the book.
that's sure. You're absolutely right. Like it's I've written books on, like me wanting to examine, some ideas that are themselves, complex and subtle and have many different things going for it. And sometimes you can just have characters talk about it while they're waiting for the spaceship to crash down on Mars. Or you can have, someone live through it and experience it while beating to death transhumanists. That might be the message, but you have to add nuance.
Well, I do hope that my readers will tell me where I've succeeded and where I've failed so the next one can be better.
Absolutely. It's a very fine book, Stephen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you kindly.
Uh, let's see here. Do you have any final words for us?
Ooh. Well, I mean, a lot of people see this as a period piece because it's set in a time of war, and if Martin van Creveld is correct, we may be moving away from the era of world wars because everyone's so afraid of nuclear weapons. If nuclear weapons are so scary that Kim Jong Un is frightened to start something, then presumably they're scary enough for anybody.
It's true.
But but the experience of enduring a world war and keeping your morality and behaving decently towards others, it's not just wartime.
Hmm.
Everybody goes through the trials and has to stay a decent person. And
That's
I
right.
think because war is so loud and obvious and in your face, those lessons can apply to all of us, even if you never have another.
Oh yes. Well, just a second. Uh, Wooly Ram just called me a New Englander, and
Oh no.
how dare he? I am a Missourian, and yeah, well, whatever. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. Are you working on your next book?
Yes, sir, I am. I'm actually been interrupted because my next book is a sequel to my superhero story that'll be coming out before too long.
Hmm.
But then I had this other idea that just took over, and for the last 4 days, I've been scribbling down stuff to keep from forgetting any of it. So, yes, I'm working on a book. At this moment, I don't know which one it's going to be.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly have you on again sometime in the future.
Love to. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too, man.